This is Gemara Menachos Daf Samoch Tes, and as we prepare for the Heilige Yontif of Pesach, just a reminder that we're Mirza Shem going to be getting all the shiurim up nice and early, perhaps even the whole Yontif before Yontif. If anyone wants to partner for any of the days of the learning during the wonderful Yontif of Pesach, please feel free to reach out. And we're on Samach Chesed Beis. We're in the middle of these very long lines. Right after the parentheses, about 15 lines from the bottom, the first one in the line is Siman. And we begin with a shaila for the day. Ba'i Rami Bar Chama asks Rami Bar Chama, Shtei Alechem Mahu Sheyatiru Shaloi Kesidron. Do the Shtei Alechem allow for the Chadash, for the new crop, if it's Shaloi Kesidron? When the Shtei Alechem is before the Omer, is it going to permit the consumption? Says the Gemara Echidami. We have an interesting case. One planted the grain in this interim time period. He planted the grain between the between the Omer and the Shtei Alechem. V'chalav alayu Shtei Alechem, and the Shtei Alechem passed over them. My vaymer my kisidron sharion shalai kisidron lo sharion. The simple answer would be it's not kisidron. You need to have the aymer and then the shtei alechem. And therefore, it's a shalai kisidron. It's not going to work. Or perhaps shalai kisidron nami sharion. Maybe it works as well. That is the Shaila of Rami Bar Chama, and really this is a nice wrap-up chazara of the previous Mishnah, which taught us that there's two entities. Each entity comes along and permits, and now the question is, do they only permit if it's done in their normal sequence or not? Says the Gemara, my Rabba, says Rabba, Tashim, I'll bring you a raya. Says the Torah of Imsak, Riv Minchas Bikurim, when you bring the Mincha Bikurim, says the Gemara. What do we learn out of this pasuk? The Torah is talking about the Minchas Omer. Mechan ba. What type of grain does the Minchas Omer come from? Menasi Orim. It comes from barley. You're telling me it comes from barley, or maybe it comes from wheat. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. We learn it out from a drasha. The Torah used the word aviv when it talks about the barad in Mitzrayim, the time period of it. And of course, as we mentioned yesterday, the incredible Siyata D'Shemaya, we're in the time period of Nisan, we're in the miracles, and it says, Namar aviv l'dairais. The word aviv is said in conjunction with the carbon aimer. Ma'aviv amr b'Mitzrayim was what? Se'oirim. It was barley. Now, what does it mean it was barley? It's talking about the barad. But it means it was the size of such, as we'll see in a moment, av amr l'dairais, se'oirin. So to the aviv says the dairais, it was se'oirim. And the truth is, we should just see for a quick moment, what's this pasuk that we're referencing? We're referencing a pasuk that that discusses. Excuse me, I don't know if I said the size of the bar. That the bara destroyed. Bara destroyed the Sairim. The pasuk in Shemais teaches us va'pishta va'saira nukasa ki asaira aviv va'pishta givol. So we see the word sa'ira, the barley, is used in conjunction with aviv. Rabbi Akiva Imer says Rabbi Akiva Matinu Yachad Shemevi Chayvasai Menachitin V'Chayvasai Menasairim. We find that a Yachid brings a mincha from wheat and a mincha from barley. V'Tzibur Shemevi Chayvasai Menachitin. And therefore, the tzibur brings the mincha from wheat. Maybe chayvasa menasairim. Now, if you're going to tell me, like we're suggesting right now, if you're going to tell me that the carbon aimer comes from chitin, then we're not having a case that a seber is bringing its chiyuv from barley. Mekar number one, the Rabbi Akiva. Davar acher, says the Gemara, I'll bring you another mekar that Omer comes from Sairim, that Omer comes from barley. 4 lines on the bottom. And you know why? Because if you were going to tell me that Omer comes from wheat, ein shtei alechem bikurim. The shtei alechem are not going to be bikurim. What do you mean it's not going to be bikurim? Look at Rashi directly across the drop up. Shari sikrav lemizbeach mechite shanazu v'rachmana karinu bikurim. Bikurim. So it would have to be the first carbon. And that's only going to work if the Omer comes from Sairim, says the Gemara. Now, so we brought down a Josh of Rabbi Akiva. We had a Shaila of Rabbi Bar Chama. Now let's use this Josh of Rabbi Akiva to circle and answer the Shaila of Rabbi Bar Chama. Vim Isa. Now, if it's true, Tishtei Alechem Shleike Sidron Sharyon. What was Rabbi Bar Chama's Shaila? Does Tishtei Alechem, if it's brought before the Omer, Sheloik is Sidron, doesn't matter. Then says the Gemara, if it were to work, then what? Then B'Shachas Lam, there'd be a new way that we can have that the carbon comes from Chitin, the Makriv Omer, Mehanach the Esher Shkaidim L'Shtei Alechem, Ubasar the Omer de Shtakad, and then Ushtei Alechem, Mehanach the Esher Shkaidim L'Omer. So then we could have a potential way of having it from chitin. That what? So says the Gemara from the fact that we saw in the Braisa that it was a raya what you brought to Omer from, because the Shtei Alechem has to be bikurim, has to be the first crop of chitin, is a raya. Shaloik Sidron does not work. Says the Gemara, Misavris, do you really think, as we turn over to Samach Esam at Aleph, Bikurim Lepeira Kamrinon? Says the Gemara, do you really think that Bikurim, 1 second, do you really think that Bikurim Lepeira Kamrinon, that when it says Bikurim, it refers to the produce? That's what's going on over here, says the Gemara. No, lemizbeach kamrinon, referring to the mizbeach vehoachila. Says the Gemara, la mizbeach mi peira deha shaita. And the case that we're talking about, the mizbeach has already had that year's produce, so it's not a raya. It's when it's actually been makriv, and therefore there's no raya. So Shaila number 1 of the day, Rami Bar Chama, we tried to bring your teretz, but the teretz did not work. And the Gemara does not try another attempt. Rather, we bring down a second Shaila of Rami Bar Chama. Says the Gemara by Rami Bar Chama, the 3rd line, Samot Hasam and Aleph. Shtei Alechem Anotza Sharya. Shtei Alechem. Do they permit from the point of Hanotza? Oy chanota sharia. What is the precise point that it's matir the new crop? Hanota or chanota? Chanota being a drop later when the fruit is a little bit more developed. Hanota a little bit earlier in the emergence and development of the fruit. Says the Gemara, Maya hanota my chanota. Ile manot de beira v'chanota de beira. Hashta shrasha sharia hanota v'chanota bibayi. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Now that we're going to tell me that the carbon is when it takes root by the grain, is there a question that chanot and hanotza will matir? Ela hanotza de Allah, v'chanota de Allah. Says the Gemara, doesn't mean of the peri, doesn't mean the actual fruit has emerged, but rather we're talking about the leaves. Is that enough? Mi have ki hashrasha, is the emergence of a leaf akin, similar to the hashrasha? Oiloi, it says the Gemara Teiku, we're going to have to wait for the Navi for that one. So 2 Shailavs, Rabbi Bar Chama, both of them, we don't really have a teretz. The Gemara now continues, Ba'i Rava bar Rav Nachman, a similar shayla 10 lines down. The first one line is loy. Chitin shezaran bekarka. We have wheat that were planted in the ground. So it's planted already. Oimer matirin, oy ein oimer matirin. Does the oimer allow them to be consumed? Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? Hechi dami. Ashra ishtanina. Idalay ashra ishtanina. We know it's totally if it took root. If it took root already, then what? Tanino, we learned already the din. And if it didn't take root, we learned the din. Now we learned in a Mishnah. And Mishrishu koidim loimer, oimer matirin. Vim lavasurin. Achiyavai oimer haba. So what is your shayla all up to the hashasha? We know the halacha. Loi tzricha, says the Gemara. Techatzinu v'zarinu koidem loimer. The case is, when harvested the kernels and planted them before the oimer, and then vas oimer v'cholef alayu, the oimer came and passed over them while they were in the ground before they took root. V'kami bayile, and the shaila is ma'u linkait umechal minayu. The shaila is, can you take those kernels that you planted? We know what the din is in the new growth. It's tali in the hashrasha. But the shaila is the kernel that you put in the ground. Can you take that out and eat it? Can you go? What's the shayla? The Gemara articulates. Do we say that it's as if they're in a container? They're full kernels. Who cares that they're in the ground or they're in the container in your closet? They're regular kernels. No, when you plant it, comes bottled to the ground. So that is the shayla. Says the Gemara, says the Gemara, there's a sidebar halacha, not a sidebar, a secondary halacha that is relevant to this shayla. That when you take these kernels and you put them in the ground, are they shaykh to aina, price for it or not? Hechidami. If the case is sellers at the bar, I put 6 core of grain into the field and I'm selling you the grain. And Vasasad, only put 5 into the ground. Anything that's measurable doesn't fall into the parameters of Aina. This is something we learned extensively in Gemara's Pamitzia, that when it comes to Aina, there are certain thresholds of price fraud that are not allowed. But says the Gemara over there, says the Gemara, is actually Gemara Kedushin as well, says the Gemara that said that is measured any amount. You can't lie, you can't cheat someone. So says the Gemara, you're right, he didn't give a precise number, but rather, the case is where he said, I put into the field as much as it needs. And the witness is saying he didn't do enough. Do we view it? This is where it's a first cousin to our Shaila. Do we view it as if it's a container? It's like movable property. And as a regular din of Ainav, and now we have a third shaila about something sitting in the ground in a similar vein. Nishbayin aleim. Can you take a shvua on them? Are they like sitting in a container? And therefore they have a regular din of metalton? Of course there'll be a shvua. And what's the halacha of nishbayin aleim? Says the Gemara to all 3 shailas. Teku, you gotta wait for Eliyahu ha-Navi. And now we go back. So we started the day with Rabbi Barachama's 2 shaylas. We segue to 3 other shaylas. Now we come back. Ba'i Rabbi Barachama, 20 lines on the bottom. First one line is Ba'i. Shabiglale bakar usairin. Says Rabbi Barachama, wheat kernels that are found in the glale bakar, in the feces, in the droppings of a cattle, usairin or barley shabiglale behema. Ma'u, what is the status? Says Gemara Lamai, what are you asking? If you're asking, we're going to become Tami Bakar. If we have wheat, Shabarai or Shabiglai Bakar, Usairin Shabiglai Behema, Chishav Aleim Nachila, That if you're a chishav aleim nachila, if while they're in the droppings one thought that they're going to be consumed, there's no din of tamas eichlim. Locked on nachila, but once you actually took them, mitamit tamas eichlim. So that can't be l'sheila. Ella, rather the case must be lemenachos. The case must be regarding the carbon. Can these grains be used in the carbon? Says the Gemara, it's also not a shayla. Pshita deloi. Why? Hakrivu no libechasecha. Hayirtzcha yisavanecha. We know that carbonas have to be chashiv. We have this in the Gemara in Sukkah and elsewhere, that you can't use wine that is megula, that is uncovered, for a carbon, because it's not suitable for royalty. So of course, if this came from the Glali Bakr, you cannot. Says the Gemara, the case is you collected the kernels and you planted them. And the shaila is, can what grows from these kernels bring as a carbon mai? Do we say mishum dimi susahu? Do we say it's repulsive? Azdam. Let me isusayu. But once it grows, no longer is it repulsive, it's a new item. Or no, maybe it's degraded quality, it's quality D, animal quality. And even that which grows from it is going to be weak. Take unachamol, a lot of Eliyahu Navi today. 4 lines on the white lines. Pil shabola kefifa mitris. A heliga pill, a heliga elephant that swallowed a kefifa mitris, a wicker basket. Vihiku aderech beisarei. And he expelled it through his rectum. He expelled it through the way he gets rid of feces. Ma'u asalach lamai. Ilim levatel tamasa. If you want to know, does it no longer have a din of toma tanina? Kol hakelim yardin de tamasa memachshava, but so there has to actually be a change, and therefore, since there's no change, it's all going to be tameh. Says Gemara, you know what the case is? A fascinating case. He swallowed the fibers. He swallowed the strands, and then they were created into kfifa mitzvahs. Miyavi ikol. The question is, he went through the animal's digestive system. Do we say it's called digestion? Havale, and therefore, what's the status of the basket as we turn over to Samachtes of Beis? The basket has the status of kli galalim. It's like a basket being made out of galalim, out of feces. And therefore, kikli adama, and therefore, ve'in mekablin tama. Tamar mar kli avanim kli aglolim kli adama in mekablin tama. That's oidama. Lumi devrei Torah. Excuse me. Lumi devrei seifrim. Oidelma, it's one side of the shayla. Oidelma lavi yikol. No, they're not called digested, and therefore they've done a basket, and the yes, mekabel, toma. Says the Gemara, tif shalei, 5 lines down, samachtes beis. Says the Gemara, let's bring a raya me'adamar ula mishum Rav Shimon bar Yohi tzadok. Mais, there was a story, ubalu zevim. Wolves swallowed 2 children in Aver Hayarden, and the bodies of these children were then passed through the digestive system and went into the feces of these animals. Says the Gemara, no raya, shiny basar, whose basar is soft, and therefore it has a din of glalim, but not necessarily that could be a raya to us. They said that the basar is tahar. What about the atzamis, the bones? The bones are not. So l'chayra, our case should be comparable to the bones. Says Gemara, shiny atzamis. They're even harder than our wicker pieces, so there's no raya. Says the Gemara, kernels that came from the clouds with the rain. Mahu. What's the halacha? That it doesn't actually mean it was rain. It doesn't rain kernels. It doesn't rain meatballs and spaghetti. It doesn't rain. Yeah, okay, we're not going to go into all our children's storybooks. But the shaila is, It got swept up and it blew and it came down with the water. Lemai says, Menachos, what's the problem? What's the shayla? If it literally came from the cloud, it's no problem. Says the Gemara, Says the Gemara, what's going on over here? Is this case even relevant? And yes, kide ede taya nechati lei rom kizbi chiti betlasa parsi. Bar Idi, the Arab, one time said that it came down so much wheat over 3 parsayas long that it was blown up and came down. So the shaila is relevant. Rav Shimon ben Bazi continues the Gemara, bringing us back to our sugya of carbon aimer. We have shibailes, we have an ear of grain that was a third of the size before the aimer was brought. Va'akara, and it was uprooted before the aimer was brought. Vishas la, and then he replanted it la'achar aimer. So it grew a third, pulled it out, and then put it back in. Says the Gemara, Vaisifa, and it went larger in size. Mahu, what's the halacha? Basar ikras linon, v'sharya imer. Do we say it goes after it was replanted, and therefore sharya imer and the imer already permitted it. Aidama basar teisefes as linon, v'achava imer haba, and therefore it grew more. So you need to have the new imer next year. Says Martiv Shalei Meha. Let's bring a raya. Tamar Rav Avu Amar Rav Yechanan. Amar Rav Yechanan Yalda. A young tree, Shesivcha Bizkena, was grafted to an older tree. And this has to do with the halachas of Arla. What status does this plant have? Uba Peirais, and how fruit comes out of it. The halacha is afilu haisif b'masayim on the first very wide line. Even if the fruit increased 200th of what it was originally, only a 200th. Aser. So what do we see? We see it gets the status of the new fruit. V'amar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Rav Yenasan, batzel, an onion, shesh saloi bekarem, that was planted in a vineyard, v'ne'akar akarem, and the vineyard was uprooted, and the onion kept on growing. Afilu haisim matayim, aser. Says the Gemara, no raya. Hey, gufa gami ba'ilei. This is our shaila. Mifshab shitale the rabbanon devasar akiras linan leishal lekula v'leishal lechumra. Can we bring a raya? Bein lechumra bein lekula. Maybe in that case only being machmir. Lechumra amrina, but by asal kula amrinan. And therefore, says the Gemara, teku, we're gonna have to leave this shaila unanswered. We'll pick it up from Rabbah the next year. B'siyata dishmai.